Okay, so we're going to do a few things. One of them is to modify our filtering. We have our select by X, meaning select by multiple, right? Nothing pornographic here. And we're going to use it to modify things. So instead of just searching the last name, we can search throughout the entire name put together. For that, we'll take advantage of the fact that we already have in the view that's being returned here, oh, look at that patient summary, right? That's that concatenated version of the name put together. It even has the date of birth in there as well, all concatenated together. So we can search that instead of just the last name, and it's a nice way to do it. We're still just searching in one field, so to speak, one piece of information, right? Whether I change the name of the parameters, I mean, that's probably a good practice. So instead of saying last name, I could just say, I don't know, in name. I'm going to search in the name, right? Whatever. Just a quick review of what we did here. Same approach we've always done with a foreign key that's an integer identity in the primary on the one side, right? We just pass in the integer value, and then later on in our where clause, we add the or to check whether or not it equals the flag value. 0 is a great flag value for integer identities because it'll never make a 0 automatically on its own. For our text, all we do is we make sure we just give it an empty string as a default, and then down here we can do our last name is like, right? And away we go. Now I've got a red underscore here because I changed the name of the parameter. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change last name to patient summary. If I didn't have, okay, yeah, I should get IntelliSense there. So by searching the patient summary, it gets the last name and first name all together. So that's a little bit better. Now I wouldn't, I don't want to put the extra wildcard character in front of the parameter value here because then it would always be contained. There's no way I could change that later on. But by leaving it this way, set up as a starts with whatever value is passed in, I can easily, before I pass the value, add an extra wildcard character to the front. So that gives me that flexibility. Then we just did our date range, right? Remember we talked about this, just to quickly review. We just use strings because strings make the best parameters there are. Then we check if we actually have a value or not, and if not, then we allow you to just say basically everything before one date or after one date, as long as we just fill in the opposite date then. So if we didn't give a start date, I'll assume the oldest date in history possible the system supports, and vice versa for the end. And there we go. We cast them to actual dates to use in the actual filter. And if we wanted to do more, maybe we're going to add, that expected yearly visits. We want to just see people, above or below a value, or even just above, right? More than some number. We could add more and more filters if we had time. But you get the idea. It's nothing new. It's just repetitive at that point in time. We've implemented all the basic rules here so far. So I'm just going to update this, right? The only change I made was really to the name of the parameter. Okay, so we'll have to make sure that in our interface that we deal with that because it'll have an incorrect parameter reference in it. I'll update the database and success. Okay, so we changed the stored procedure. Again, if you want to make a new procedure, all you do is give a different name before you do the update, and it'll actually create a new procedure anyway. All right, so that's good. So we're ready there. So I should probably change this label from last name, patient summary. Maybe I should say summary. Okay. All right. So, a couple tricks to make this work. Truth is, caching is a wonderful thing. You may or may not have thought about it before, but whenever we have a grid view, if we've turned on sorting and grouping, or even without that in many cases, what the grid view does is it asks the data source to cache the data. That's why you can click those column headings to have it resort, and it doesn't actually have to go all the way back to the database and run the query again, because that'd be very expensive in terms of performance if it did that every time. So what the system does is it looks for clues, hints, to know that, hey, I better go get a fresh copy of the data. If you, because each of these controls right now are defined as control parameters for our DS patients, any changes to any of these controls, the system automatically will say, uh-oh, we better go get a fresh copy of the data from the database, right? That's one of the hints that it looks for to know it's time to go refresh from the actual data source itself. Before I forget, I'm just going to run this configuration because we've got to fix that one parameter. And it gives me a chance to talk about how that caching works as we go through. So select by X. See, I've lost the parameter reference here because I changed the name of the parameter. So in name will be my control. Which one? My drop down list. Sorry, no, my text box for, oh, I should have changed the name, but it won't be perfect. Sorry. Shouldn't say last name filter, but you understand the idea. Now don't forget about this as well. I have to show advanced properties because by default it converts empty strings to null, and that won't come off very well. It won't work properly when I'm looking for an empty string as the parameter. So I'll set that to false. So just leave the empty string an empty string, right? And then that will work fine when I go to pass the value for the parameter. Okay. So again, so changes to any of the controls, right, that are used for any of these parameters automatically tell the system, oh, you've got to go refresh. Okay, you can't just rely on the cached version, the data set that you have cached locally for this one user. So the problem is when I go to, no, just say no. When I go to change the filter to it contains, we'll look at the code of how we do that in a moment, I'm going to have to let the system know, okay, I know that none of your parameters have changed, but I'm still going to need you to go and refresh, right? So the easiest thing I can think of to do that is to use the actual event related to this. Which event is that? Anyone remember? We've used these list controls before. They pretty much all work the same. Feel free to shout it out before I get to it. Selected index changed, right?
Not what I thought at all.
Oh, okay. Whenever you change the current selection, because remember, a list basically has a collection of list items, and there's a selected index of which one is currently selected, right? So we get selected index change fired every time we change the selection from one thing to another. Okay? So all I'm really need to do here is say, okay, go refresh. Now here's a bit of a review question. Back when we talked about refreshing data-bound controls, remember that where you have two different data source controls looking at the same data, but they're separate now. You're not, so changes through one don't automatically refresh on the other. We wrote one line of code that did the magic work of forcing the system to go back and get a fresh copy of the data. Do you remember what property was it of a bound control we used? We set it to the same value it already had, but just assigning it was a quick and easy way to force it to go refresh. I could just pick a bound control, like for example, in this case, the grid view 1, I never did get around to naming it, dot data source ID equals, and it takes a string, right? You confirm that, just hover over, it says string. That's just the name of the data source, while that, of course, we know is DS patients. Okay, I won't get IntelliSense to help me write that because it's a literal string, right? So I have to know the name. So giving that one command, this is here just to force it to refresh whenever I change my option from contains or starts with, right? Refresh the data set. You're going to do quite a bit more work with data sets next term as you do your rapid application development course. Okay, but anyway, that takes care of that. So the only thing I have left now to take care of is how do we actually then modify the value of whatever is typed in here as a parameter value. How do we modify that to add the extra wildcard character? Well, that is in our PowerPoint. So if I just bring up, this is the last slide we looked at together, right? We looked at all the changes we made to the stored procedure, but there was a couple things we needed to do in the interface, right? Like for text strings, whether it's for dates or like comparisons and so on, right? We set that convert empty string to null equals false. Well, we did that. So that's taken care of. So another way you can get in there and manipulate any parameter, you can even take care of that issue in here if you wanted to, is the fact that we actually have events that allow us to examine all the parameters before they go to the database. This isn't totally new because we've done this before, but we have always in the past focused on the after events, right? With a data source control, the inserted, updated, deleted, sorry, all those tids, sorry. Don't mean to spit on anybody, I hope I'm not, right? Those after events are where we've got the information, we ask the database to do it, we get feedback back from the database on how did everything go? Did you have a good day today updating that record? Oh, crap, you had an exception, eh? All right, well, let's deal with that. Well, that was the after events. But in the before event, we can actually examine and look at what the parameters are being passed as we ask it to insert, update, delete, or even select, right? So the select itself has before and after events. So this, in my code here in the PowerPoint slide, it shows something we've talked about but never got time to actually show you. How do we provide that audit information on who is changing the record? Well, we never did actually set up any parameters in our grid views or details views or anything to handle that, but we could do it right here in code. So when you go to do that, say insert or update, we could just, in that event handler, go e.command parameters, and that gives us access to the parameters. We could just add our updated by or whatever, and we would pull it if we actually had the full security system implemented here. All we have to do is go user, and that's the logged in user. .identity.name. Just a bit of a look ahead there because we'll be doing more of that next term. You'll be learning how to use the security system and so on. But in a similar way, we can also change things like this start with to contains. All we have to do is say whatever the name of the parameter is, its value. Good, that's it. We'll glue on that extra wildcard character in front of the actual text that we're passing. And that takes care of it then, right? So I'm going to put almost this exact code you see in this slide in there. Just a note there about you have to refresh, okay? But we've already put our line of code in place that takes care of that whenever we change the option to contains or starts with. So we just need that one bit of code and we should have it fully functioning. So that's going to go again in my data source, the one that goes and selects the data. Come over to the lightning bolt here, and sure enough, right down here's my before and after events for selecting and selected. So it's the before event, the selecting event in this case. Double click there to create that event handler, and here it is, right? So in the selecting event, now I have to decide, do I need to add the wildcard character in front of the literal text being entered in the text box or not, right? Well, simple if, it's a decision, right? So if my radio button list filter option dot selected, I could do a selected index because I know there's only two of them, 0 and 1, right? Or, it's probably more readable if I do selected value because that's the value, right? Equals or compares to, and that's a string. So if I didn't show you as I was creating this, but I'll bring it up here now, going into edit items. So starts is just starts, and contains is contains, right? So I can just take that, come back here. Okay, so if the selected value is contains, well then I know I want to add that extra wildcard character. So how do I get at the parameter? It was in the slide a second ago, but just to show you, the E object in this case is SQL data source selecting event args, right? And it's got all kinds of information about the select command being sent. Command, I should say, dot parameters. And as a collection, we use the square brackets if we want to name the members, right? So the name of the parameter in this case was, I changed it just a minute ago in my stored procedure. It was in name. But you have to remember the @ symbol because that's part of the definition or the name of the parameter itself. Most common mistake students make is they forget to put the @ symbol when writing this kind of code. So I can set the dot value of the parameter. So it would have one already, but I can modify it, right? Equal to, I'm going to hard code because I'm asking for it contains. I'll hard code in a % symbol plus whatever's already in the text box. So that was txt last name filter. Sorry, didn't change the name. Dot text. Okay, and that should take care of it. So now I can switch to having, okay, a regular starts with to a contains, just by making that one change. And I don't have to modify the stored procedure. Now it can do both kinds of filtered searches. Plus I've changed it so it'll actually find it anywhere in the name. Okay. One last thing. I'll show you the problem and we'll show you the quick fix, but there's a problem with my clear I'll show you in a second. Why isn't that one red? I guess I just didn't give it my CSS style. Sorry. Remember if you watched the video, you saw we added these just to make sure if you're actually putting dates in here, they're real like dates, right? And that the one is chronologically before the other. Okay, so let me there's my compare validator. Go back to properties, CSS class. I think I've added it. Yep, DD validator. There we go. Okay, well let's just run this in Internet Explorer. Oh, I have to actually click run. Okay. And dynamic patient filter. No, it won't. Okay. So if I put in the letter F, right, now it starts with, so only names that start with. Now we're looking at the whole patient summary now, right? So that just gives me these two here, but if I change that to contains, okay, so this one has an F further down the big long string, right? And it's included. Let's try E. A bunch of them have an E at least somewhere. I don't think anybody has an E at the beginning. Oh, I should have put my empty data template in there, sorry. Okay, but here, let me show you the problem with the clear button. This is a small detail, but bugs the heck out of me when I forget to do this. Suppose I have garbage in here, right? Click filter, yeah, I'll get my message. Date must be a valid date. You think, well, let's start fresh. I want to clear. Okay. This is, why am I validating? I just want to clear, get a response redirect back to a fresh copy of the page. Well, the problem is all buttons, by default, there's a property called causes validation. By default, it's true. So my clear button, I have to tell it, don't ask for validation, just do what you're supposed to do, which is ask for a fresh copy of the page. So that's the last little thing I need to fix here. That is just a simple property of the button. Oh, there it is right there, causes validation. Change that to false. That will fix that problem. Just for those, I know somebody will say, well, you should have done that. So let's come in here to edit templates on my grid. There's my empty data template. No patients match the criteria. At least it's something, right, to appear on the screen. Okay. Alright, so if I have garbage in either one, I can still clear, right, because it doesn't ask for validation anymore. Get a fresh copy back. And look at this, I can even do, because the date's in there in the patient summary. Okay, who has got 1990 in their patient summary? Oh. Oh, starts with. Nobody starts with 1990, but if I go to contains, then I see everybody whose birthday was 1990. So that's another way I can even do the date thing to some degree as well, right? As well as we did see my date range business works as well, right? So we have a fair bit of flexibility now in terms of getting our dynamic filtering up and going. Any questions about that? Okay. So because this isn't an actual parameter that the query looks at, the select query, we have to actually force it to refresh when we change this option. You could add even more logic if you wanted to, because really if there's nothing in here, right, there's no need to change it because you're not searching for that anyway. But you know, it's okay. It's good enough for now. Good enough for girls I go out with, right? Sorry, honey. Okay. All right. Well, that's it. I'll stop recording.